So thank you for that very extensive introduction. Of course, my first love is trees. That's been my love since I was a kid, probably, in Pennsylvania. Went to Penn State University for forestry a very long time ago, before I really knew about horticulture, which is probably the best way to go, because it got me really into the tree kind of things. I also have a new qualification not on there. It's called TRAQ, T-R-A-Q, and all of those are through the International Society of Arboriculture, and that one is a tree risk assessment qualification. So that means I can go look at trees and give you an idea of what might happen to them. Bad, good, indifferent. Usually it's not indifferent, but right. So I'm glad it's raining, but my students are on their own this morning. I have some TAs that are giving a quiz today, and guess what? The quiz is on oaks. So there's a lot of anxiety, right? Because I don't know if you know, the oaks are pretty, some of them are pretty much look alike, right? They're, as we call them, the two Ps. They're pestiferous and they're promiscuous. So they kind of interbreed in certain areas. And we can use that for good, but it also makes it tricky sometimes to identify them in the landscape. Anyway, let's get started. All right, so we're going to talk about healthy plants, right? What makes a plant healthy? How do we get healthy plants? But if you get nothing out of anything that I talk about today, I want you to see this word right here. No pointer. I'll point to it right here. I'm never going to stay in this zone. I'm going to tell her right now, 5 feet, never going to do it. The word thrive, right? I think all too often we select plants and put them in the landscape in hopes that they're going to survive. I think we need to start thinking differently. How can we put plants in the landscape that will thrive, right? Especially in a changing climate. We're going to see a lot of different things happening, right? What did we have? Record temperatures in November? I suspect every year we can end up having record temperatures, record high temperatures. So how do plants adapt to that in the long term? And so it's going to change some things, and we'll talk about that a little bit. So how do we prepare the site? What do we have to think about? When we do that, how do we properly install plants? There's still, you know, I've been in the landscape industry for a long time, right? Talked about and taught about proper planting and proper pruning. And I once asked my students, you know, why do you think people still do things the wrong way? How should I help fix it? Well, Dr. Ferry, you need to educate. I said, well, what do you think I've been doing my whole life? Yes, and still the problem is most of the people that do the things incorrectly don't come to the meetings, right? They don't come to the education events. So that's the challenge that we face. I'm quite sure you still see crepe myrtle pruned incorrectly, right? That's been our kind of like our basic plant that says stop doing these things, and yet we keep doing them. And I'll explain to you why I think one of the reasons is. So how do we recognize how to prune them? I'm going to go through that obviously very quickly. That could be a whole day, right? A whole few hours of training on that. So a lot in a short period of time, right? That chapter covers a lot of stuff, doesn't it? Yeah. So that's what we're going to do. So what do we think about when we select plants? Like, what are some of the things we think about, right? Certainly, I would say one of the most prominent is aesthetics, right? If you ask most homeowners, what do they want? They want something pretty, right? And I tell my design students, I'm not a designer. I cannot design my way out of the box. However, there's still one thing in common with all of that, right? Is they need to be pretty. So in my mind, the aesthetics is at the bottom. Everything should be pretty. Maybe your idea of pretty and mine might not be the same. Like there's some people who really love purple-colored, purple-leaved flowered or purple-leafed plants. That's great. I don't like only those. There's people who are obsessed with them. There was a guy in the city in Columbus who had his whole street tree was all purple leaf plum. Okay, that's like a lot of not diversity, but okay, we'll go with that. So let's think about the other things we have to think about. What is the functionality? What is the functional use of plants in the landscape, right? I tried to get our department, we did a big strategic plan, right? And I tried to get them to change the word from ornamental to functional. And they're like, nobody's going to understand that. I said, well, I think they probably would if you gave them a chance. But we get to determine that, right? So how do we use them? We use them for a lot of things. Probably one of the biggest things and most important over time here particularly is stormwater mitigation, right? Think about rain gardens or think about very large stormwater devices, right? How do we use plants to serve what we need to have happen in the landscape, meaning how do we slow water, how do we infiltrate water, how do we take up water, put it back in the water cycle without losing soil and all of those other things. You know, you go to the beach, what do they use plants for at the beach? Pardon me?
To hold the sand.
To hold the sand, right? Bank stabilization. A great plant for that, of course, is northern sea oats. Northern sea oats is a native. However, northern sea oats, if you ever put that in your landscape, you put one plant in, now you probably have a yard of northern sea oats. That's kind of how it worked in my yard, and now I deadhead them ahead of time, trying to minimize the population in the yard. So the ecological context too. So what are we planting along creek beds or ponds or whatever? What is that natural habitat like? And are we selecting plants that fit that bill? Right? We know if you walk along Rocky Branch, which is on campus, or any of the other greenways, what do you mostly see plant-wise? Anybody know? Is it native? Mostly not. It's mostly plants like ligustrum, okay, privets. They still sell privet, but it is certainly a non-native and highly invasive species. If you drive along the freeways in much of the northeastern United States, you will see a beautiful tree, granted, it's great, but it's also invasive, calorie pear. You may know it as Bradford. But there are many cultivars of calorie pear out there. So in order to do all these things, we need the plant to be able to function that way, right? Deer pressure, yeah, all bets are off there, right? There's all kinds of cool things you can do. I know Worthington Farms, a big nursery in Johnston County, hangs fabric sheets in their trees. It works. They buy a lot of fabric sheets. I think Downey is probably in really good shape with them. But you know, they are not going to put them in your landscape probably because it's a little weird little white flags hanging all over your yard. But people come up with a lot of cool stuff, right? And I'll tell you, if the deer is hungry, the deer is going to eat whatever it needs to eat. Bottom line, right? It doesn't matter if it's a rhododendron that they normally wouldn't eat. If they're hungry, they're going to eat. So the horticultural and cultural requirements. When we say cultural requirements, what does that mean? What does it mean to you all? So this is always a storytelling thing with me and you, and an interactive part. So you tell me what you think that means. Cultural requirements.
What the plant needs to survive.
What the plant needs to survive with regards to.
Well, how much human interaction that plant's gonna need? Like, I don't wanna have to water something a million times.
So that's what I would classify in the maintenance category,
Okay.
but certainly how much water they need, yes. But you know, some of us gardeners are like, you are on your own. I'm putting you in here, I'm establishing you, good luck, I'll see you later, right? Unless it's a really special plant, you're like, I really don't want that thing to grow, right? So I have some of those, but that I will water in times of severe drought, right? Or newly establishing plants. And if anybody tells you ever a native or any other plant does not need additional water, they are full of horse hockey. That is just not the case, right? Because what is the basic premise of life? Water. Plants cannot go year after year after year without water. Thus, think about what happened in Texas a number of years ago, a 5-year drought. Millions of trees died. Millions. Didn't matter if they were native or not, they're dead. Right, so we have to kind of keep that in mind when we think about the need. Of course, light, what does all that mean? Full sun, part shade, dry shade, full shade, dapple shade, right? Somebody asks you, where can I put this plant? You know, and on that cute little card they give you at the nursery, it says, oh yeah, part sun. Well, what the heck does that mean, right? Because we know there's different kinds of sun. And eastern exposure with the full sun is certainly different than southern exposure with full sun, right? So, and then other factors, of course, what are the problems that plant might have commonly, right? What is there? That's abiotic and biotic disorders. So who can tell me an example of an abiotic disorder and maybe what that means? What does abiotic mean? If I tell you biotic means insects and diseases. Yeah, drought, something that is abiotic, it's not living. However, I kind of, you know, we put humans in the biotic category, right? But then we do a lot of things that cause abiotic problems for plants, which we don't plant them correctly, we don't put them in the right place, and so on and so forth. Or we put them in soil that looks, I'm never going to, soil looks like that, right? I came from Pennsylvania. We had clay soil there too, really rocky clay soil. It just wasn't red, it was like dark brown clay soil. So I personally would much rather have a clay soil than a sandy soil, because I know I can do some things to mitigate this situation there. And not all clay soils are compacted either. It just depends on what happens. All right, so you guys have probably seen this new heat zone map. It came out when I think in 2022 or 23, somewhere around there. And so it's kind of hard to see this up close, especially with the light right there. But here we are, right? Zone 8A, 8B. Look at the state. Most of it is 8A. Not that many years ago, it was 7A, 7B. That's so much better. Thank you. I just know it is because the pictures are going to show up better. So, yeah, there's still going to be places in the mountains that are going to be much colder, right? And there's still going to be times when you're going to get, like a couple years ago, we got, what, a 9-degree day here. So, yeah, they're still going to have those extremes from time to time. But in general, and what do they base that heat? What do they base that on? That map.
Cold. The average cold.
Yeah, the average minimum cold, right? So you'll see I get very particular about making sure the whole definition is there, because I do that with my students too. Like, what does soil texture mean? What is soil texture?
Loamy or
Mm-hmm.
something silty.
Loamy or silty or sandy or clayey, right? But it's actually, the proper definition is the percentage or proportion of sand, silt, and clay in the soil. And that proportion is the really important word there, because you have a sandy loam versus a clay loam. It's going to behave really differently with regards to water retention, and that's what it's really all about. So what are some of the pros of having the hardiness zones kind of different, right? We have to try to look at the positive, right? You notice there may not be quite as many pros as cons there, but we'll do the best we can, right? So an expanded plant palette, that's pretty cool, right? So for example, where do you find live oak? Quercus virginiana?
Coast.
The coast, right? You certainly see it down in Wilmington. They planted just street trees there. I mean, y'all been south of Charleston, right? It's like their tree, right? So the south is where you're going to see live oak. I'm going to tell you, I believe we should be planting more live oak here. I see trees of live oak. We've got some on campus, pretty big diameter. I think that it is worth the risk, and I actually think the risk is pretty low. So I think it's going to be much more adaptable. So start thinking about those plants in slightly hotter zones. How can we start creeping them in? Obviously, we're not going to plant gazillions of them, but can we put a few in and give them a shot and see how they do, those marginal plants, right? And so, of course, a longer growing season, that can be good or bad, right? How many of you guys have been seeing things that kind of stopped blooming for a little while and then decided to start blooming again?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, whoa, what are you guys doing? So that maybe's good, but it's maybe not good for certain plants. Like think about camellias, right? Camellias are that tricky one, right? Whether you do Sasanqua or you do japonica, neither of them really is ideal because of when they bloom, but they're great plants otherwise, and super drought tolerant, by the way, right? So some of the cons, you might have more invasive plants, right? Again, that depends on what we're trying to plant in the landscapes, what we're bringing in and why we're bringing them in. By the way, it wasn't all horticulture people that are to blame for all of the invasive plants in the country. There were plenty of soil and water conservation people. There were plenty of wildlife people and forestry people. There were plenty of invasive species there as well as us. So anyway, so fewer freezes. So that might mean some of those insects that might die in some cases, they're not going to die. They're going to overwinter in the ground or whatever. So you might see more pressure from those insects in particular. Diseases maybe, but that's getting a little, not 100% accurate, I guess you could say. So, and then I guess some of those marginal plants that we had, the 6B ones, maybe they're not going to survive here anymore. It's going to be too hot for them potentially. And if you saw a map, and if you ever look at some of these forestry predictions, right? We have an oak beech forest, or we have a pine oak forest, or whatever. They have classifications. You'll see that drifting. So in the next 50 years, you're going to see far less of some of those species in the south, more as they creep up north. And over time, plants can adapt. In a short period of time, not as much, right? So those fluctuations in temperature is what really devastates our plants. So dormancy, flowering patterns, fruiting patterns, as I said, you've already kind of seen those. I don't know if you all have seen the heat zone map. The heat zone map is actually based on the average number of days per year over 86 degrees. How many days over 95 do we have this one? Too many, right? I would say too many, if you're out working. And so look at that map. So we're kind of halfway, that's, so greater than 60 to 90 is that green zone 7. The yellow is 90 to 120 days over that temperature. So when you get to 95, a lot of people kind of have that as part of that climate change model. And think about people who work outside all of the time. Roofers, gardeners, landscapers, all of those people who are outside in that heat. So it's a bigger issue than just the health of plants, it's the health of people that we don't always kind of put all together. And of course, then that raises your cost for, all of it is, it all relates actually. So there's that cute little, those cute little tags, the Dahlia Peach Perfect. Yeah, they all look exactly like that in your yard, right? That's what they get homeowners to believe, certainly, right? Especially the ones with fruit trees. Did you guys have a fruit tree thing? Was it Mike Parker, Dr. Mike Parker? No, I did. No, you did, okay. So Dr. Parker, he's of course our extension specialist in the state for fruit trees, and he gets a lot of questions on it, and people want to grow stuff, and he's like, no. Well, how about this? No. Well, do I have to spray them with, pesticides, whatever, in order to control diseases? Yes, if you want a particular fruit production. So he's a commercial guy though, right? So he has a very particular perspective, but he's honest. That's what I like. I'll always be direct with people too. Hey, that's not really, I'll try to do it diplomatically. That's an interesting way of pruning that. Yeah, here's what's going to happen now because you pruned it that way. But so here's our definitions, right? But as I said, it depends. And that is always the thing we say in extension, right? And I tell my students, you can answer by saying it depends, but you can't stop there. You got to tell me what it depends on, right? So it depends. Is it dappled shade? What is the exposure of that? Is it afternoon? Is it in the, because there are certainly plants that will do great in eastern full sun, not so much in southern full sun. So we want to be really thoughtful about where we place them. Again, will they survive? Probably. Will they thrive? Probably not. Okay, so thinking about what that actually means. I love the heights and stuff too. And of course the distance, they tell you to plant them. Yeah, I'm really bad about that. They're never that far apart. And I'm like, oh crap, I really shouldn't have put them that close together. That's in my backyard. Right there. Got a lot of extra time on my hands. No, that's along with gardens. But so what are the maintenance requirements? I'm showing you two things that are really high maintenance, topiaries and a little thing we call pollardy. This is a pollard type pruning. They do it a lot in Europe. If you ever been to the Elizabethan gardens in Manteo, they have like 50-year-old crepe myrtle that they have pollarded. That's the right way to make them short and keep them short. All right, now that you have to preserve. See that big knotty head? It's called the pollard head, and that's P-O-L-L-A-R-D, pollarding them. And that's very, very common. But imagine how much work that is, because you're cutting those off with loppers or hand pruners. So you got somebody spending a lot of time in there doing that pruning. So if you got, if you're going to pay people a lot of money, that's certainly the way to do it. All right, so understanding that maintenance, and there's a lot of people now in the design industry and landscape architecture, I hope, that are being trained to understand when you select plants, you have to think about the maintenance. Particularly for our campuses, for our commercial and government sites, you have to think about the ability to maintain those because you often don't have enough staff, right? How much staff do you have? That's almost always the limiting factor. So, hey, anybody know what these are? Some of you might be old enough to remember this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that what you're pointing there?
Say it again.
No.
Yes, with elm.
Dutch
They're American elm. And Dutch elm is what happened to them, right? Dutch elm disease. Carried by what? You don't think about that. It's carried by this little beetle called the elm bark beetle. So any tree that was injured, so that's really important with how you time when you prune them so that the disease would not be spread, because those little beetles are like, oh, there's a fresh pruning cut out there. I'm going over there, right? So that's what happens. But majestic trees, right? Why did we plant them like that? Because of that, right? Because also American elm, you can put it in a little cutout in the street, pave up around it, and spit on it and say, what else? And it'll be like, what else you got? It doesn't care. It's all right with that, except that little one weakness of the Dutch elm disease. So we brought in another species of tree to replace it, Zelkova serrata, Japanese Zelkova. You might have heard of that. It's base shaped. There's no way that tree is replacing that, though. doesn't get that big, doesn't look that good, and it's not actually a good performer for the South. So beautiful trees, tough trees, but then what did we do? We do this a lot. We don't learn from history. We plant things over and over and over again. Crepe myrtle, what's the problem with crepe myrtle right now? Yeah, crepe myrtle bark scale. It can kill it if you do not do anything about it, and I've seen some heavy populations on there, so control may be necessary in certain situations. But my point being is, it's all about diversity, right? I don't mean you can't plant a street with all one species, but you know, Raleigh is the city of oaks, right? Who can tell me what the most predominant species of tree is in Raleigh? Crepe myrtle. Who can tell me what the second most predominant species is? Red maple. Yeah, planted, I mean, yeah, you probably got Bradford pear, I read it. Red maple. Then you get oaks. And then which oak do you think it is? Indeed, way too much willow oak. On NC State's campus, they did an inventory, and I'd say it was 80 to 90%, I can't recall the exact number, 80 to 90% in the Fagaceae family, which is beech and oak. So 80% of the population of trees on campus are in that family. And then probably about 99% of those were willow oak. So not good, right? And the willow oak also gets a little problem, I don't know if you know about, called Lacanium scale. You put it in a hot, dry location, it gets this little insect called Lacanium scale, and that is also a problem. You guys have probably seen it and didn't realize it, because you've seen trees that look black, like covered with black. That's sooty mold. Sooty mold occurs on any of the scales that produce honeydew or on aphid honeydew. So it makes the tree look really unattractive, and your client's going to be like, what the heck is this stuff, right? Somebody will call you and say, my tree's black, what's going on? Right, you'll see it on crepe myrtle bark scale. So what do you call this? What would you call that thing? That area on the left, my left. That's a rain garden, essentially, right? That's a stormwater device. That happens to be in Portland, Oregon. Yeah, no sidewalks. There's no sidewalks in my neighborhood, but I'd love to see that along the streets in my neighborhood in Garner. That'd be crazy, right? But look at the diversity of plants and look at the functioning nature of that just small little ditch that we might call it. But how attractive can it actually be if it's thoughtfully installed and designed? So lots of function. We see a lot of these, right? No problem with that, except what? When this sucker right here dies, or that one down there dies, and you're like, oh, what are we gonna do now? Now we're gonna have to buy one that's the same size. I guarantee you guys are gonna get those kind of calls. So you either gotta buy one that's that big, or you gotta think of a different way to do that. Right, leave a little bit more space. There's a lot of plants, Leyland cypress, red tip Vitinia. Both of them have fungal diseases that are very, very predominant, partly because of how we use it. If you give them space, then the disease doesn't spread as readily. So it doesn't get you the whole screen you might want, but how do you make that a little bit more diverse? I don't know the answer exactly. That's something we need to be asking those questions about. How cool is this? Anybody been to Bartlett Tree Research Laboratory down in Charlotte? Yeah, you got to go there. Hopefully, I know a lot of the Master Gardener groups are able to go down there and take a tour. You should check into it. I can hook you up with some names if you want. It's absolutely amazing. Anybody know what that plant is that's been pruned like that? I don't know if they call that pleaching or espalier. Espalier kind of covers it all in my mind. So what do you think that might be? It's normally a shrub. Right on, yes, loropetalums. Loropetalum, when does that plant bloom? It blooms in spring? Yeah, again, it blooms in the fall a little bit. Yeah, not as much as it blooms in the spring, but in the fall, and it's still blooming right now. Right, so they had magnolias there. You can't see a couple of different species. You got a deciduous magnolia, you got an evergreen magnolia. I think there's beech there. Beech is an amazing tree. In Europe, they shear that sucker. They shear it as giant trees. Right, they've got these big shearer machines going down the road. So pretty crazy what you can do to plants.
What was the vine?
The vine, actually, I don't recall. I think it's actually just grape. Right? It's a native, maybe a muscadine grape or whatever. I'm sorry, I don't recall. So what do you think's going on here? This pretty little bug. Oh, he's pretty. A lot of those little devastating bugs are cute. If you like bugs. That's all the same species of plant it's on. If you can figure that out, you might get to the bug. It is an azalea. It's azalea lace bug. So azaleas I don't know, they're pretty tough. It doesn't seem to bother them too much, and I'm amazed when you have that much lack of photosynthetic material that it doesn't kill those plants, or they don't suffer that much. If you plant them in more sun, lace bug will be a bigger problem. So if you have them in more shade, it might be all right. Coming from the north and coming down here, and I saw, oh my gosh, why are there all these azaleas planted in full sun everywhere? What's going on down here? But they seem to do okay for now, at least, right? All right, azalea lace bug. So here's that Zelkova. Does that look anything like an American elm? Of course not. Yeah, nah. And this is how I often see this tree now. I do not recommend planting this in the landscape anymore. I see a few that are really awesome. Most of what I see are really terrible. The branch habit is so tight, and they get this dieback in the inner part of the canopy that just does not work. Those other trees are actually lace bark elm. There's some sort of cultivar. There's a lot of lace bark elm or Chinese elm, almost parvifolia out there. It's considered by many to be invasive. There are some planted in the city in big cutouts, and you'll see gazillions of little seedlings underneath there. They produce a ton of seed. So I don't know if I don't think birds eat it, but it has a wing, right? So it blows around in the air. But that's how those things look when they put them in. I'm like, this is terrible, but they're still alive, right? But was it the best choice in this case? I don't know the answer. They're still alive. Are they functioning? Yeah, but they started out bad. So my thought was, they're pretty big. They're probably 4-inch caliber. I'd like to see them do a little bit smaller caliber tree. Rose rosette, y'all heard of that? Right. So it's not as terrible as we once used to think. All right, we can talk about that some other time if we have time, but not as bad. As it doesn't mean like if you have a bunch of knockout roses and you take them out, doesn't mean you can't put new ones back in there. Good news there, right? What's this other? So root rot. What is that plant? That's rhododendron. So if I top through a root rot, and root rot becomes really bad after a significant drought usually, because the fungus has been kind of lying dormant. And then as soon as it gets wet, it's like, woo, happy day, right? So it goes crazy. So you guys, big issue. What do we grow out in the western part of the United States, western part of North Carolina? We don't grow them, but what else? Yes, Fraser fir, the most, Christmas trees, right? They are really susceptible to this. You can imagine an entire field going south, right? A lot of money out there. A lot of millionaire Christmas tree growers out there. It's amazing. Yes, ma'am.
What do you do about root rot?
Yeah, again, it's making sure you have a well-drained landscape as much as possible, right? So if you have an area that's too swampy or too wet for most of the time, do not plant rhododendron in there. Any other rhododendrons, because if the Phytophthora is a oomycetes, it is a soil-borne organism. That means it stays in there no matter what. And sometimes it's dormant, sometimes it's not. So good drainage is really the most important thing, right? Once you have it, there are a few chemistries you can use to try to prevent it and then sort of treat it, but there's no cure, so to speak. But there are some fungicides. But yeah, it's all about picking the right plant. You can see that's kind of a low-lying area there. That's mostly why they're kind of doing that. All right, so let's talk about planting. 3 types of planting stock, right? Bare root, which we don't do a lot of, simply because it's a little trickier for most people to manage those. There's a really short time period. We got container grown, we got ball and burlap. So I'm going to talk about each of them. So ball and burlap, of course, machine or hand dug, and certainly not hand dug most of the time. Right? That would be a lot of work. And so these guys are amazing that know how to use these tree spades, because you'll see the baskets, the wire baskets lined out in the field with the burlap in them, and they're digging pop, 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 and the guys are coming behind tying them together, and they're on their way out. Notice how much of the root system is left behind. So it's pretty remarkable in the first place that the trees do so well once we put them in the landscape, because they've lost that. So handling them is really important, because if you drop that root ball, then you end up kind of working with a bare root plant now, but a bare root plant that doesn't have all of its roots. That's the beauty of most bare roots. They have their whole root system when you purchase them, right? So transportation issues simply means they're heavy, right? Big. A 2-inch caliber plant is probably 250 pounds. So if you're a commercial person, you got a skid steer, right? You got the loops on the basket. They pick it up with the fork and they put it in the ground, right? So you have to have at least a helper if you're going to do one by yourself, typically. How do you ship them? I've seen crazy stuff out there in my days, as you can imagine. I used to work at a nursery. People would come in and they'd buy a tree and they're like, I want to put that in the back of my Toyota trunk. And I'm like, okay. And I will say, how are you going to get it out of there? Like, we can get it in there for you. How are you going to get it out of there when you get it home? Plus, you know, as you just picture this, somebody driving down the road with a tree in their trunk in full leaf. By the time they get it home, what's it going to be? It's going to be deciduous, right? It's not going to have anything left on it. Or they're going to be really crispy now. So you kind of say, yeah, that's not the best plan. So, needless to say, we do try, you know, when we do that, we try to encourage people to let us ship it to you, let us deliver it, but we'll have it tied up. So when you buy plants, you want to make sure you have burlap or some other kind of tarp to tie things up. If you're getting them yourself on a trailer, awesome. But make sure if they're in leaf that you have them tied up. Right? I still see nursery, you know, landscapers doing that, with the whole thing wide open to the air. All right, so the biggest one that you hear the most about are the container grown plants, because of that right there where you see a root bound pot, right? I remember going to a conference once and there was a guy, he was a landscape architect, he taught himself about soils, he became an arborist, he was really good. But he came to a conference in North Carolina and spoke to a bunch of nursery growers as well as arborists and stood up there and said, we should never be using container grown plants anymore. And I said, did you want to get out of here alive? I know. I didn't say that to him, but I was thinking that. Because you're saying this in front of a bunch of nursery folk who make their living growing these plants. And I understand his feeling, right? Because what is the media that those plants are grown in? It's soilless media, right? It's mainly pine bark here. Some people add a little sand or they add slow release fertilizer in there or whatever. But it's mainly pine bark here. Pine bark fines. Pine bark is not soil, right? So when you put that in the ground, you have a distinct difference between what's in that ball and the soil around it. So we'll talk about how do you manage that root ball in a second. But the problem is you get these circling roots right around the outside. Now, if you're buying them and they haven't been in the nursery for long, you're not going to have those necessarily. You can break them up with your hands or beat it up a little bit, and you're all golden, right? But if you have one that's been in the pot for a long time, you're going to have to do something about that. Plus, there's this thing called trunk girdling roots. More important, because you can't see them. And I'll show you that in a minute, how you manage those kind of things. So yeah, you can move them easier, but you can also buy container grown plants that are 95 gallons, right? You can buy a really large container grown plants. It's going to cost a lot of money, but you can certainly do that. But so depending on how you do that, it's okay. The other thing that I kind of argued with him about is by managing them, you can do it in a fairly short order. I've taught people that don't want to learn how to plant trees. Some city workers are like, why do we got to learn how to do this? And I'm not doing that. It's going to take forever. And I'm like, all right, Tommy. And in 5 minutes, I have the root ball managed and it's in the ground. So they can't really argue with that too much, right? So you have to know that they're going to dry out faster though than the surrounding soil. So they are going to need to be managed a little differently irrigation-wise than a ball and burlap plant. All right, and the bare root stock, well, how do we usually get them? You buy them on online or whatever. You get tree liners, like for fruit trees primarily. That's the big one, right? What's the big fruit tree company? Begins with a B. I never remember. Pardon me? Yeah. I always want to call it Bartlett, but I know it's not Bartlett. But anyway, it doesn't matter. But that's how you buy them, right? How do they come? They come wrapped in moist newspaper or moss or whatever, wrapped in plastic. But they're lightweight. That's the cool thing about them. But you have a really short period of time when you can plant them because you're planting them when they're dormant, right? And the selection isn't as great of species. The size is not as great. So with the other two, you can get much bigger plants, but you also have to deal with shipping soil all over creation and shipping big containers. So they have their benefits. I want to show you this thing right here we call the topmost or a first order root. I want you to just keep that in the back of your mind where that is, because that's important no matter what kind of plant you're planting, whether it's container or it's ball burlap. All right. So some common planting issues. Is that volcano mulch or is that planted too high? What do you think? It is planted too high. How do I know that? Because I'm a weird person and I stop by the side of the road and I pick stuff up. And it happens to be on Centennial campus, which makes me sad At least it wasn't NC State people who actually did this bad planning. It was some people that they hired. But this is an oak. This is not a columnar oak. It's not fastigious or upright. This is a tree that's in serious stress. That's why it has all that adventitious growth. The top part mostly died. So too high. What happens when it's too high? Let me ask you this. What kind of mulch do most people use? It's right there, that example. Yep, triple shredded hardwood. Okay? So mulch, or most of it is made of what? Bark, right? What does bark do for a tree? It protects it, right? It keeps moisture in, right, and stuff out. So it's hydrophobic. So what happens is that it has to have a wetting period, right? So once it gets, you have to rain and rain and rain for it to really get wet, and then hold that moisture, and then the water can be released down into the root ball. However, if you've done this, where's most of the rain going to go in a light rain? It's going off that root ball, right? So that's really a problem. So we need to plant trees at grade. And I'll talk about that when we talk about planting. By the way, if you go to Google me or go on the NC State website or the horticulture webpage, there are a number of videos on planting. You should definitely check them out. There's a series. How do you plant ball and burlap? How do you plant container grown trees? I don't talk about bare root because most people don't do that. So how do we manage those kinds of things? And it's really good you'll get a visual of the stuff I'm telling you now, right? So yeah, so that's not volcano mulch. That doesn't mean there isn't volcano mulch happening out there. In this case, it just isn't. Is this planted too low? Absolutely. When you can see this, there's where that first main order root was, is down here somewhere. Look at this one. Where's that first main order root? It's down there, right? Look how much soil we have on there. Plus, this is some kind of fruit tree probably, because there is the graft union. The graft union must always be above grade. Usually you're talking 6 inches, depending on where it is on that tree, right? So you notice, we're this deep in the soil right there. All right? So that's pretty important. This is sad. These are sad because these are real life. I can't make this stuff up, right? These are pictures from the Walmart in Garner. I go there to take pictures of bad landscapes. But I kind of go there to make little bargains. I hate to say it, but so anybody know what that material is? You probably never think about it, but if you're in your car, you think about it. It is a seat belt, right? So they're using old seat belts. That stuff doesn't rip easily. That's the cool part about it. But if you notice, see, you kind of see a loop here. Remember I said they have loops on either side so the skid steer can go in there and pick those babies up and move them over. This was done by a landscaper, probably the low bid. And it's like, yeah, this looks terrible. This makes the people think that we are just a bunch of mow and blow guys and girls that don't know what we're doing, right? So it's unsightly. Why do you need to leave it on there, right? This is also a problem, the burlap, right? Even if it's natural burlap, what's going to happen? As it dries out, it's going to pull moisture away from that root ball. Plus you see the wire basket. If you're using the wrong kind of string trimmer, you cut that basket off and it impales your partner over there, right? I know it happens. I've heard about it. So why leave it on there? Leave it in the wire container. However, not the whole wire container. Right. Okay. So you got to get it in the ground where you want it situated with the wire basket on there. Then you cut off the top 1/3 to 1/2 of the wire basket.
Say that. So
yes, of course they don't. There's so many bad details out there. I'm sorry to tell you. You watch my video, you will find that is not correct, right? So here's the deal. I've seen people also say take the entire wire basket off. Here's my problem. What if you buy a tree from Johnston County? Anybody been there? It's really sandy soil. You take that wire basket off, now you are working with a bare root plant again. All right, so I don't recommend taking that basket off, especially if the hole isn't quite dug the right depth, which you hope you fixed in the first place. But sometimes, you know, it's like hurry and it's not right. And so you got to be able to manipulate that root ball. That's the only way you're going to do it with the wire basket. But you would never see that. And here's a quick thing. I did a tree study the past couple of years at our field lab, and it was looking at different soil amendment things, right? Because you're going to see a lot of recommendations here in the past few years that say add 30% by volume organic matter to the soil. I call that the designer soil. It's super expensive. They did it at the Southwest Terminal when they did it years ago, and they did it at the Art Museum. The Art Museum, it cost $1 million for soil alone. So here's the problem is that much organic matter. Do you guys know how much does regular soil have? Like if you go out there, how much organic matter? 5%. Very different, right? So I only ever recommend no more than 20% by volume, and I'd rather see you down at 10 to 15. If you do it right, you're going to be golden. Bottom line is, I did that treatment, and I did a treatment the old-fashioned way, right? You had a couple inches of compost, you till it in as deep as you can get it, and move on with your life. Those trees did far better than the ones in the fancy compost. The cool part about it is we got the trees out of the ground and to look at the root systems. And interestingly, the ones growing in that special designer soil had far less fibrous roots than the other ones. Plus, you can still see the wire baskets on there. And so I'm going to write a little fact sheet about it because it's pretty cool. I sprayed them bright orange so you can see them against the roots. All of the roots of the tree are up here, right? A lot of the roots going straight across. The wire baskets are way down below there. Not going to cause any problem because some people say, well, it'll girdle those main big buttress roots. It will not if you do it right. You with me? Does that make sense? Yep. Yeah. You want to leave that basket off or a basket on there as much as you can. Root pruning, again, that's what you do with a container grown plant, right? You put it in the ground. This is out of Ed Gilman. This guy, Ed Gilman, was at the University of Florida. He's retired now. I think he lives here in North Carolina. He did a bunch of research on planting and pruning of trees. But this is what you do. You prune the outside off, you shave it. So you're taking off the outside circling roots. Then you go in and do the slicing. You see where he's sliced it there. You get as close as you can. You can use a reciprocating saw. It's a lot easier than the shovel and beating the heck out of it with your arms. I've done it all different ways. If you want to get your anxieties out, though, it's a good way to do it. Or putting that ball down and just beat the heck out of it. I did a study on that too. You put it in the ground just like it is and do nothing to it, it's not going to grow as well as if you do something with the root ball. I will tell you, I have seen recommendations from other state extension groups that say wash all of the media off of the plant. You guys know what a best management practice is? Right? There's things that a best management practice has to have, right? Has to be based on research or good anecdotal information, and it has to be something that people are going to do, right? It has to be applicable and cannot be overly expensive. Imagine if you had a landscaper who's planting 100 of these trees. Are they going to wash that media off of there? Number one, where's the media going to go that you're washing off there? Where's that water going to go that you're washing off of there? It is not a practical or economical practice. If you have one tree, one plant, and a person in their yard wants to do it, then tell them to go for it. But not as a general recommendation. I will never recommend that. And that has to be separated from a homeowner doing it on their own. That's perfectly fine. The theory is you can see all the roots, you can fix whatever you need to see, right? And you get better contact with the soil you're planting in it. I agree, absolutely. But this will do the same thing if you do it right, okay? So especially if you're recommending it to people who are doing this as a living, you're not going to do anything that's going to cost them a lot of money and time, which that root washing will. We do root washing for experiments. Oh, good Lord. Everybody's like, are you root washing today? I'm so sorry. Yeah, because it's like, it's going to take you forever. Imagine a big tree, how long it takes to root wash that sucker. Yeah, it's a lot of time. All right, so the planting hole, you guys know this stuff, right? Should have sloping sides. It should look like a saucer and not a bowl, right? A big shallow saucer so the roots can grow out in there. All right, 2 to 3 times. See, people will always ask me too, if it's wet, should it be even bigger? No, it should not be even bigger. You should put a little mound. You're going to have to dig it a little deeper, create a mound on the bottom. So when you set that root ball on there and you've compacted that mound, it's not going to sink any, but you're still going to have that first main order root just at grade, right? Not above, not below. If you go above, no more than 2 or 3 inches. Not what you saw in that other picture was about 1 foot. Or even 6 inches is way too hot still. You guys with me? You got all that? Right, so that's kind of how we manage the hole. Lots of great videos, and as I said, if you look at those, you'll see how we do that. In general, the research does not support putting a bunch of organic matter into the hole with that backfill. So black cow, any of that stuff that people want to put in there, you can tell them to go ahead. It doesn't hurt anything, but it also, no research says that it helps with the establishment or growth of that plant. It just doesn't. Loosening it up, making sure that soil's, kind of broken up, that's the thing that helps. All right, so this is great. This is, of course, how you tell if it's the right depth. Whole problem with this picture, of course, it's 900 years old, but problem is I don't know if this is loose underneath there. Should not be loose. The plant should not sink. That bottom should be compacted so the plant doesn't sink. That's really lightweight. Plus, I don't know where that first main order root is in that root ball, so I can't tell if it's the right depth. This just cracks me up. This picture close to this old one is hilarious.
Right.
Who knows where this person thought this tree was going to go, right? But he's compacted it. Even this, with your foot, is a lot of pressure on the soil. Compaction is a killer of plants. Bottom line, whether they're herbaceous or woody. Woody plants can obviously take more compaction than herbaceous plants, but compaction is the killer. I have actually seen people, I'm not going to tell you what people, because it's embarrassing, that have used a gas-powered compactor to compact the soil in a hole. And it's like, what's the point of that? You might as well just carve out the hole and jam that tree right down in there. They tell me, well, we didn't want it to fall over. What? How's that going to help it not fall over? Because you're going to create this really solid compacted soil around it, and then it's just going to pop in the hole right like a joint, right? So right out of it. So their logic escapes me. And the trees aren't doing well, as you can imagine. So, that's what staking's for, to hold them on into the ground, right, if you have to. All right, we're going to talk about that in a minute, too. Hey, that is volcano mulching up in the top there. That tree is only 10 feet tall, so 1/3 of that tree was mulched. Here you see, this is a great example of the triple shredded hardwood bark mulch. What happens? It gets crusted over the top. So you can't even get that loose with your fingers, right? So people always want, how much mulch, right? You guys tell me. No more than how much hardwood on a woody plant bed? What's the depth? 2 to 3, yeah. Some people would say 3 to 4. I like the number 3 because then it's not too little and it's not too much. So you say 3, then they're going to put 4 down anyway, right? So it's all right. So no more than how much pine straw? You can go a little higher, right? Because pine straw is loose and fluffy. Right, so you can go 6 inches. It's going to compact itself a little bit, but no, not in any way that's going to prevent water infiltration. You have to be careful because some communities don't allow you to put straw next to the house or whatever because it catches on fire. Right, many things can catch on fire if they're dry enough, as we have seen in a lot of places. How much on a herbaceous or flower bed? 1 or 2. I always like saying 1 because then they're going to put 2. The most important thing is keep it away from the crown of the plants, particularly herbaceous plants, because they will get root rot. The biggest killer of herbaceous plants is poor drainage, for sure. So people get freaked out about this, and that's great, because if it's like this, that's a problem putting it up next to the trunk. But if you go out in nature, is there stuff piled up around the trunks of trees? Sure it is. It's just not that crappy stuff, right? Yeah. It's not mulch, right? So keep that away from the trees. Ideally, the new recommendation is you plant a tree, you do not put any mulch on the root ball. Nobody's ever going to do that, so I don't usually tell people to do that. But the idea is to get better infiltration of water into the root ball, oxygen kind of stuff moving out and through. But yeah, use good products. Everybody always asks me, what's your favorite mulch? I'm going to tell you my favorite mulch is actually wood chips and leaf compost mixed together. Because the leaf compost breaks down fast and then the wood chips take a little longer. Most people don't like it because there's stuff in it. Nature. There's like sticks and twigs and big leaves, especially if it's magnolia. It's like giant leaves on there.
When you say wood chips, is that the same thing as pine bark nuggets?
No.
Or is it different?
No, wood chips is like what you would get if somebody does tree work for you or whatever. You can get it from the city. I guess there's some, one of my friends gets it. There's a
Chip drop.
Yeah, but you get a ton.
You get a ton, I know. It's like his whole front yard. It's like a giant house. I'm like, what? He doesn't want grass, so it's good, yeah. But yeah, that's the problem with the chip drop. You have no idea what you're getting or the quality of that, right? You get it from the city, same kind of thing, but most of the city's it's all gonna be mixed together, so it's very unlikely you would have just pine. Now, there could have been other stuff in there, it's hard to say. Like in recent years, there have been some issues with some of them, like the chips that have come in. I know in Greensboro, Guilford County, they had a huge thing for vegetable gardens and stuff that were devastated because of herbicide residue. So yeah, there's always you know, some you gotta watch for. On campus though, we get leaves in from campus. We have wood chips come in from tree care companies. We mix them together and compost them. And composting helps with everything, right? It breaks down a lot of that crap that's in there that you don't want in there. And so doing that, that to me is a great product, and it closes our cycle, although campus likes to fancy stuff better, but our stuff is pretty darn good. All right. So yeah, why do we mulch? We mulch for a lot of reasons. It lowers the temperature potentially in the summer, and it helps reduce water loss. That's beautiful. That's a beautiful mulch right there. If you're gonna do one tree, right? If you're gonna do a bed. Nothing wrong with that other one. They just didn't create the berm. You don't have to have a berm there. It's fine. But look at the weed competition reduction, 80 to 90%. That's pretty significant, right? That's why we want to kind of do that. But here's my thought. And mulch is the underwear of the landscape. Some people maybe wear boxers or briefs or I don't care. I don't want to know what anybody's got on. However, you get my point. Why do we need to see it? Why are we not using plants instead of mulch?
Yes.
It's more expensive. I get that. But I hate seeing here's a tree, here's a tree, here's a tree, and here's a sea of mulch. An underwear of mulch. But you know, people like hostas or don't like hostas. Yeah. People like variety or don't like variety. I understand, like I think variety looks 100% better than just mulch. That's my personal opinion. I've also seen it, if you go downtown Raleigh, you see the cutouts where you see some sort of like stone mulch or whatever versus variety. Look at the trees. The trees are doing better with the variety. Cooler, right? It keeps it cooler. So lots of benefits. Plants like each other, except for turf and trees. They don't dig each other. It's not a good relationship. They need some counseling. All right. So again, proper mulching. Hey, you know, if you like this mulch, don't worry, we can get you some help. Guess where this is? This is at the Walmart. And that's fine. That's Carissa Holly. Yeah, that mulch, there's nothing wrong with it. People like some of the colored mulch. They do it at the RBC Center or where, you know, the football team plays. Because it's red, it's NC State. It's like, yeah, okay, whatever. But you can do red in many other ways. How about putting flags up instead of putting red mulch? Yeah. So again, there's nothing wrong with it. It's been tested. There are laboratories that test mulch and compost, and we used to have one at NC State that got retired. But so yes, there's nothing wrong with those products, right? That doesn't mean it's an overall statement that everything could possibly be safe. You get where I'm going, but they would have been sued by now if a lot of plants were dead. Yeah, nothing wrong with it. Most of us just don't like it. But that's inexpensive. That's why those guys use it. I don't know where they thought this tree was going. Anywhere, it's going nowhere, right? And it's great. It's got a watering bag on it. I like that. The bag looks a little empty. That's the key to good success with watering bags. If they're empty, you should fill them up. If they're never empty, then you should unplug them because they're probably clogged up on the bottom. Those little tiny holes get plugged up very easily. I see this step kind of, yeah, don't use grandma's old hose and wire. It's just not going to work out very well. I didn't tell you, you know, the good old Homer bucket from the Home Depot. Nothing wrong with that. Doesn't look very good. So you could use Lowe's. It's blue. Or you can use whatever color you want. But you put holes in the bottom and you put it at your tree and fill it up. You know why too? Because it's so much easier. Because you don't have to, you got to get out, you got to find the nozzle, you got to open it, shove the hose in there, right? Or if it's a bucket, you fill it right up. Right? Yeah. And it delivers it the same way. It's just not as attractive. I try to get my commercial people to do it, and they're like, yeah, not a chance. But a Homer bucket is what, $5? Those watering bags? Probably 12 or 15 now. I don't know how much they are, but they're not inexpensive. But you can reuse them. You can reuse them. All right, so hey, look where we are again. So you recognize this tree, right?
Yeah.
So I asked, this is bad. I would never have accepted this tree if they planted this. I would be like, you guys are fired. I would have fired them for a variety of reasons, but that's the first. So they're staking that thing. That's terrible staking. We don't recommend staking like that anymore. Probably, you notice, because it is still wire with hose. There's other ways to do that are more professional. That is actually a Chinese pistache. Chinese pistache are little crazy, ugly duckling trees when they're young. That little curve in there will be gone in a few years. It will grow out of that. It will straighten itself out as it puts on caliper. Now here's a good story. I'll usually focus on the bad, but not trying to, because there's just so much bad out there. These trees, Foster holly. That was summer, kind of, you know, the end of summer. They should have been green. They should have been a lot greener than that. I thought for sure they were gonna croak, they're still alive, and they look pretty good. So I'm happy about that. I'd like to see success. I'd like to see us do a better job of trying to get there. So here's some staking methods. Again, came right out of Ed Gilman's laboratory. He studied all these. See, you can do this, but we want to make sure how we're attaching it to the trees, not some crazy way. This method right here, D, this is what I recommend. This is what I've been teaching for years now at the Urban Forest Council meetings and everything else. So those are 2x2s. They are untreated, so they will break down very quickly. You also use drywall screws to attach them. So the only drag is trying to make those points. That's what I have a boyfriend for. He's really good at making those points on the bottom of my stakes. I can't get a straight stake to save my life. It would still kill a vampire though, but not, you know. Needless to say, so in this case, it depends on how many you have. If you have a big tree, then you want to use 4 down stakes. You want to cross them. I personally would have had this a little closer. You want to make sure it is on the root ball. If it's a smaller root ball, you can do 2 sets of stakes down. You're just going to angle it a little bit. So why non-treated? You don't have to go back if you don't want to. That's the beauty there. They have them far enough apart on that big tree that they will break down. The tree will grow right around them, right, and come out of there. So, and if you don't like them, how easy it is. You come back, zip, zip, zip with the reciprocating saw, you're on your way. Plus, if you mulch that, you can see them. You can mulch over top of them. It's really handy. Folks like it. Plus, if you get some of the staking material, like if you buy some like called duck bills and stuff, and you hammer them down into the ground with 3-bar, and they're like $15 a piece, it goes in there and never comes out again. You can buy these, each piece. I think I bought them recently, $3 or so. So you probably need 2 for 1 tree at the most, right? It just depends. So yeah, wood has gotten much more expensive, but that's still a cool way. So it's like stapling it, right? Stapling it down in the ground, because what are you trying to hold down? You're not trying to hold the top of the tree down, you're trying to hold that root ball down, right? I can't get landscape architects to catch on to this yet. Like you said, you see all these specs and it's like, what is that? But they share them. They share the bad specs. It's like, how do you share one of these good specs?
Can you go back to the slide?
I can.
And you said that you're putting it in the root ball.
Yeah, no, you see, you're putting it right beside it.
Beside
It has to be snugged up right against it, right? So when you do it, and you'll see it in that video I have, you hammer them down in right close to the ball as you can. You have to make sure till you kind of get them square, or else it's weird trying to screw them together. It's like, well, that's not quite accurate, but it doesn't matter. You put them in, you hammer it, you put those sides on, and then you hammer them each again. So you kind of solidify it as a unit. All right, it really works.